Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. Another less produced video here, but I like talking about Dungeons and Dragons and roleplay games, so let's go. Dice. I am, in the real world, a maths teacher as well, so dice are entirely up my street. As a gamer, I like using them in a game, and as a mathematician, I enjoy understanding how they work. And a lot of my friends are convinced this gives me superpowers in games, and that's the reason that they lost, and it's not their fault. Sorry about that. But what dice should a future version of Dungeons and Dragons use? I have talked a lot about dice in previous videos. In the Fireball Fiasco, I talked about how high variance dice can make a game better. And I also really like custom dice, roleplay games that use special dice that are tailored for that game. Like the Star Wars roleplay games from Fantasy Flight Games. I really like their narrative dice system. But is this right for Dungeons and Dragons? Should Dungeons and Dragons stick with a standard set of polyhedral dice or move into something more adventurous? Now, I did specifically advocate for high variance dice for Dungeons and Dragons as it is written now. But if I was to rewrite Dungeons and Dragons for a 6th edition, I would probably want to keep with the standard polyhedral dice and avoid situations where too many of them are being rolled at once. Fireball is the classic example, doing 8d6 damage. I think that would be a lot better if it did 4d12 damage. But what would be even better still is instead of saying it does full damage on a failed save and half damage on a success, saying it does 2d12 damage, but that's doubled if you fail your save. That has reduced the number of dice you are rolling from 8 to 2. That makes the game faster, easier. It means there's less time picking out dice and adding the numbers together. And it means that players need fewer dice, which makes it more accessible. Now, I know dice goblins exist and players like me will still have a big bag of their favourite dice. But picking out 2d12 for damage rather than 8d6 makes a huge difference. With clever game design, the mathematical problems from rolling too many dice can be somewhat mitigated. Now, I still like my specialist dice. The game that I want to make for myself will use a dice pool system of custom dice. For the game of Warhammer 40,000, I think what I call non-linear dice would be a great invention. These are dice where the numbers go, instead of say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it might be 1, 3, 7, 9, 15. So there isn't a standard set of dice numbers from 1 to n. There's a specific set. And the reason this is useful is because you can build complicated maths into the system without people having to do complicated maths. It's all built in the dice anyway. One thing I like about dice is that each face represents a different value. But we sometimes lose a lot of that when there are only 2 outcomes on a dice. A d20 has 20 different results, but we group them into success or fail. There is no degree of success built into the game. Should this be changed for Dungeons and Dragons? Probably not. I would like to see a more advanced system with degrees of success than there is in the game right now. But I don't think anything too mathematically complicated is appropriate for Dungeons and Dragons. As I've said before, one of its cornerstones, one of its key points is that it is a very low barrier of entry game. There is not much mathematics, there is not much equipment that you need to start playing. And requiring players to do more calculations or buy specialist dice feels wrong for Dungeons and Dragons. Not for other games, absolutely, but for Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think that's right. So how could a potential future system honour this great legacy of the D20 system, but still offer degrees of success? How can we stick with standard polyhedral dice and stay clear of the dreaded bell curve of rolling too many dice at once? I think there's a way. I think there's several different approaches that are worth investigating. And if this was my job, that's what I would spend the first portion of my time doing, looking into the core mathematical system. Is there a way that we can keep the essence of Dungeons and Dragons whilst changing the restrictions of bounded accuracy with the restrictions of still using standard polyhedral dice? Something I've been thinking about is replacing proficiency bonus or ability score bonus with dice themselves. I don't like the Dungeons and Dragons ability score modifiers. Your ability score is almost irrelevant. The modifier is the only thing that really counts. Sure, your ability score is useful for things like multi-classing or accessing certain equipment, but the ability score modifier is where it's at. Is there a way that we could change this so that ability scores unlock a dice that you add to your D20 roll? Same with proficiency bonus. If you're proficient, you add this dice. If you're not proficient, you don't add this dice. That would turn a standard skill check into 3 dice, the D20, your proficiency bonus, and your ability bonus dice. I think rolling 3 dice for an ability check wouldn't reduce it too much to a bell curve distribution. And I also think it might overcome some of the elements of bounded accuracy. So is this worth investigating? I'd love to know what you think on this. Is the D20 system absolutely critical for you for Dungeons and Dragons? And changing it from its current system, would you have a radical difference, a minor difference? What do you think of my idea of changing proficiency bonus and ability score modifiers for bonus dice instead? It certainly would add a lot of potential for extra abilities for different classes to interact with this new rule mechanic. Anyway, please let me know your thoughts and enjoy your next game, whatever it may be.